Good afternoon, everybody.
Good.
Thank you so much. And this is, I think, maybe one of the last sessions in reInvent. Before the party, we stand between you and beer and a human Velcro wall that you can chuck yourself at. I think they had that last time I was here. So thank you for showing up this late on Thursday, and also thank you for schlepping all the way to this side of the convention, because it is a bit of a walk, so we appreciate it. I need the clicker. My name's Rob Nolan, and I am the Chief Technologist for our DoD team here at AWS. And I'm joined with Mr. Brian Masters, who is formerly the Dragon Cloud Program Manager and Chief Architect at the 18th Airborne. And we have, there you go. And we have Mr. Paul Puckett, who until very recently was the Director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency with the US Army. So what we want to do a little bit today is just recap some of what AWS does with cloud in the Department of Defense. Brian's going to take some of you who are not familiar with who the 18th Airborne Corps are through their mission and what they focus on. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency and its charter. And then what we really want to do is we want to get into a discussion, because you've got a great week here learning about all this cool stuff AWS is launching and doing, but these two gentlemen have been at the forefront of what the Army is actually doing with cloud. So I want to let them talk to you about the innovations they've made, about the lessons they've learned, and hopefully take away some things that potentially you could use as you're advancing your mission. Make sense? Awesome. So really quick, if you're not familiar with what AWS does with cloud, we've been doing mission-focused cloud for nearly over a decade now. I've been at the company for 6 years, focusing on everything from enterprise systems to mission systems. Cloud has enabled the department to move quicker, be more agile, learn, experiment, and grow in its adoption of technology. And some of the things we've been doing today from an unclassified standpoint is, I don't know if you know that we run very large SAP systems on AWS, supporting logistics for the US Navy as well as the Army. We are helping the DoD learn how to implement DevSecOps architectures, or just DevOps with security, right? How do you learn how to build modern software? And DevSecOps is not just about building containers and running them in Kubernetes, but it's the whole life cycle of building secure environments, places where you can iterate on code, collaborate with others in a secure fashion, bring in partners that you might not normally work with in a government lab, for example. We've been demonstrating next generation capability with the Airborne Battle Management System with the US Air Force. We helped the Navy launch COVID symptom trackers on their ships after the pandemic started using our Edge technology. And we're helping the department realize its goals around the transformation of how they use data to inform decisions and create decision advantage for the warfighter. So as you can see, we are a very deep partner with the DoD, and partners like Paul and Brian are helping us take all this great technology you heard about this week and bring it to the warfighter in a way that makes it consumable for government and ideally starts to accelerate that adoption and bring down those iteration cycles so we can continue to bring better and better things to our warfighters. All right, so Brian, maybe if you could go ahead and just give us a little bit of info on who the 18th Airborne Corps is.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks, Rob, and thank you everyone for attending this session. As Rob said, my name is Brian Masters, and I recently led the cloud efforts inside 18th Airborne Corps. So what 18th Airborne Corps is, and really why it's important to quite frankly, everyone sitting in this room, is 18th Airborne Corps is known as America's Contingency Corps. The Corps is tasked to be a global reaction force, and in that tasking, they have to be able to deploy anywhere on this globe within an 18-hour sequence. So 18th Airborne Corps is comprised of 4 major divisions: 82nd Airborne Division, 101st Airborne Division, 3rd Infantry Division, and 10th Mountain Division. We also have separate brigades which support the Corps and provide that total warfighting function. So the Corps essentially operates as an organization, right? And the size of this organization is massive. We're talking about a 90,000 person organization, which comprises of 42% of the operational force. So that's your warfighting force. That's your force that can go anywhere in the globe and do the business of the United States, right? So it's pretty impressive when you think about that, shaping that force, moving that force. And in order to do it in a rapid fashion, 18th Airborne Corps has shifted focus to be a data-centric warfighting force, right? We know data is a strategic asset that we need to leverage in order to execute our mission appropriately. So just a quick high level of what 18th Airborne Corps is, and hopefully that resonates with everyone in this room. You know, you've seen it on the news with recent deployments to Afghanistan to secure HKIA. You've seen it with recent efforts in Europe. 18th Airborne Corps is on the forefront of anything this nation needs to defend its country.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Brian. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency and its charter and your role there as the director?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, everyone. The Enterprise Cloud Management Agency was once the Enterprise Cloud Management Office. It was created in late 2019. And the whole entire purpose of the ECMA was the United States Army felt as though there was some adoption of cloud computing across the Army, but the Army is a massive global force, about 1.4 million people. And what they found is that access to cloud-enabled capabilities was very limited. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to centralize, more so from a governance perspective. Kind of the idea at the time is, hey, we're going to create some policy and some strategy when it comes to adopting cloud at scale. And we're going to put this out to the force. We're going to be all in the cloud in 3 years, and then this thing called the ECMO is going to go away. And so I was brought on board as the director of the ECMO at the time. And when I looked at kind of that strategy, I said, well, this is a fundamental shift in transformation when it comes to how simply we operate to deliver our mission. And we can't just look at a cloud as like a thing that we buy and we're all in 3 years and we're done. There are all these other facets that have to change. And so the Enterprise Cloud Management Office put out a cloud plan, and really was a strategy and a plan at the same time, but really was addressing all the components of the United States Army to truly adopt cloud and deliver value for the mission. And so what we do is, like it says there, is we design, lead all of the actual strategy and then execution. And as we got on the journey, the Army realized the value in this strategy and shifted the ECMO to become an agency. And so now the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency is a permanent component of the United States organization when it comes to how we adopt cloud and how we modernize into the future. When it comes to AWS, we actually run AWS in 4 different regions. We're in Amazon Commercial on the unclassified side, both of the Gov regions on the unclassified side, and then also in the secret region. And we have operational capability in all 4 regions today, and we support the mission today with those capabilities. And finally, just a few other components of the strategy. We put together this buy, secure, build type of model. And we said there needs to be common ways to buy, common ways to secure, and common ways to build capability. And so we created a few different things. You see camo there. It's our buying vehicle, if you will, when it comes to all things cloud. C Army is our managed secure ecosystem running in each one of those regions. And then we've got a few other components to help people in their journey. So we deliver some common services when it comes to modern software development that facilitates the practice of DevSecOps and tries to move towards what we call a continuous ATO. But really in the Department of Defense, there's a lot of work you have to do before you can have an operational capability, and the most cumbersome probably being the authority to operate, a very security relevant thing. So we accelerate that for our customers. We also deliver some common services around data within CData. And then finally, we also provide them a mechanism to move into the cloud that we call CMAP, the Cloud Modernization Approval Process. And this is essentially how we come alongside our customers and help them in the journey to cloud, all the way from I don't know what the cloud is to having the most complex and robust hybrid cloud architecture is getting those capabilities into the hands of soldiers, and so we can impact our mission positively.
And a couple of things I take away from that, Paul. One is that you mentioned that the Enterprise Cloud Management Organization became an agency. And that's it's a distinction that I think maybe we could expand on a little bit, because that's a big deal. Like that means that somebody recognized this is not something that sticks around for a short time, but we need this as a full-blown capability, right?
Yeah, a field operating agency actually requires approval from Congress. And it went ultimately to the Secretary of the Army when it came to the approvals as well. And that also meant that in order to get to the Secretary of the Army, it had to touch every single organization that had a say in it across the United States Army, and everyone agreed. There needs to be a persistent component here when it comes to adopting cloud at scale, and that needs to persist in the future of the Army as they continue to modernize.
Yeah, I think the enablement campaign is super relevant too, because I've worked at Amazon for 6 years, and I still show up at places periodically when they say, Amazon, are you here to give us discounts on Prime or something? It's like, why is Amazon here, right? And we have this giant campus in Las Vegas, and it's like, are you guys not watching what we're doing? But so I think that enablement's important because there's a lot of mystery behind this. It's really not that different from a fundamentals perspective, But when they see the crazy announcements we talk about here, and then you try to adapt that to the mindset of a lot of folks operating the way things that are done the way they are today, that enablement is so powerful to make sure people understand the benefit we can take to the warfighter with cloud.
Absolutely, and I'd probably say, we were chatting about this on the side, is, there's a lot of perception as reality, there are a lot of fears, and a lot of unknown in things, and then I often say that, perception is really one of three things. It's either reality, or it's a lack of knowledge to understand reality, or a lack of skill set to be able to have the knowledge to understand reality. And we have to address all three of them, especially in a highly, bureaucratic and regulated industry, much like the Department of Defense. There's a lot of work that we have to do, because those limitations from a skill set perspective as well as a mindset perspective are the barriers when it comes to unlocking the opportunity with cloud computing for the mission.
Yep. Super, super, super important to get people educated on this, because I think the value proposition is really strong, but if you're not willing to kind of investigate and kind of open your aperture just a tad bit so you can see the similarities while you can also see the benefits, it can be really challenging to adopt. So now we're going to move into kind of just a chat. I'm going to ask these guys some questions. We're going to talk a little bit about some of this stuff. So the first thing, Brian, maybe help us understand the challenges that warfighters faced with technology in the past. Like, why was this important for the 18th to embark on this Dragon Cloud adventure?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, the venture started in innovation, right? It was a problem that one captain inside 101st Airborne Division saw, where whenever he needed to go to the field or he needed to rapidly deploy, again, 18-hour sequence anywhere in the globe, right? He had to take all his equipment with him, all his server stacks, all the shelters that supported it, and then to include the power generation, the fuel, the soldiers, the people. Essentially, it was about 2.5 aircrafts, right? About 2 to 2.5 aircrafts that were required to move an organization, right? So we lacked the modern infrastructure to rapidly deploy mission command applications anywhere on the globe and leverage those, right? So whenever we came across this innovative effort, right? And really, when I talk about innovation, it's how do we solve today's problems with today's tech? And then really, to kind of bring it down a couple levels, it's how do I make my job suck a little less, right? How do I have something in my job that absolutely sucks, right? Setting up all these stacks and setting up tents and filling the generators and all this, and run lines, just to pull up these mission command applications that I had running back at home station. So we lacked that, right? Yeah. So we came up with, hey, let's take this. We know we have the cloud. The ECMO was just stood up with really a roadmap on how to do it. And really, we just got to experimenting. Didn't know if it was going to work. Didn't exactly know how to do it, right? But that's kind of innovation. And when we think about innovation, 18th Airborne Corps, think about 82nd. Back before World War II, they were like, hey, we got to get our soldiers behind enemy lines. Let's strap a parachute to their back and then drop them, right? That's innovation. That's trying to figure it out. So it's really embodied inside 82nd.
Yeah, and what's really interesting to me about what you guys have done with Dragon Cloud, and maybe you can help us a little bit understand how AWS and cloud has helped enable this, but the fact that it's green suiters, it's actual active duty soldiers building tools to help them make their jobs suck less, as you put it, or enable their mission. Yeah. So how has cloud helped these guys build the skills that Paul was talking about and bring this innovation to the core?
Yeah, so cloud, and Paul said it a couple months ago, probably about a year ago, he said one of the fundamental benefits of cloud is lead time to experimentation, right? We knew we had a problem, right? We had to deploy anywhere around the globe. We had to bring all our equipment, but we had to have our mission command applications so we would know where our soldiers are at, what they're doing, potential enemy threats. We had what's called C2, command visibility. So what we looked at was leveraging the cloud and the infrastructure that the ECMO at the time was creating, and say, hey, we're going to run these virtual machines on a stack in a TOC. Why can't we just run it in the cloud? It's secure at that level. So really, it was what's called a warrant officer, chief warrant officer, CW3 Brian McDonald, and a Captain John Shoemaker, really kind of upskilled and figured it out how to do it kind of on their own, right? And really, that was kind of the driving factor. So once we deployed these mission command applications to the cloud, we started to see rapid benefits. We started to see adoption, right? And then to kind of back it up a little bit, to start these efforts, we had a command-driven emphasis or effort called Project Ridgeway, which had 4 different lines of effort, and the first one was culture. So we knew if we were gonna go after any kind of digital transformation, we had to address the culture first. And then the second thing was upskilling in digital literacy. So we understood that cloud was a means, right, to get after innovation and to deploy these mission command applications anywhere in the globe. We just had to get the culture and get our soldiers to a place where they could do it on their own.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue to the next topic, Paul. You know, you think about these soldiers and the tools that they have today, and a lot of them are out there building spreadsheets and just trying to figure out ways to hack together what they have. You know, can you talk about some of the challenges that ECMO and ECMA started to see with organizations like the 18th who wanted to give those green suiter guys the ability to use these tools, and how you kind of thought about enabling those transformations?
Yeah, so really we lucked out when it came to 101st, because I remember the first message that John Shoemaker sent me, and he said, I'm tired of lugging all this equipment into the field. We've been cannibalizing our systems, trying to see if we can leave some stuff where it's at and just take what we truly need into the field and then connect and share the data. But they ran out of equipment. They didn't have access to the resources just to even try to test their idea. And what we brought to the table were those resources. And typically in the government, the time it would take, even if someone had access to kind of like a means to get to those resources, would be months, if not years. Because the way that we actually kind of write requirements and do all these things, we typically have to predict the future. Part of the model that we put in place is we need to be able to deliver these capabilities from just an access to resource perspective immediately. We need to be able to have contract vehicles established where I can get an account and give it access to these guys and let them actually get hands-on into the environment to start learning. Because some of them, for the first time ever touching the cloud, was when they were part of this initiative to build out Dragon Cloud. And so we simply, with the camo structure that we had, we were able to have a conversation. We were able to seed them some money. In less than, I think it was about 20 days, they actually had the account access into the environment to start building. And that's just simply unprecedented in the DoD. And that didn't mean that we had to predict everything that they had to build. We just had to give them access. And so from like a mindset perspective, they already understood the opportunity because they're the ones that felt the pain. And I think that's really important as well with innovation. Sometimes we think that we can outsource innovation to some other organization for us, but really the best innovation happens with the people who own the mission and actually are the ones that feel the pain, and therefore they're some of the best people to enable to solve their own problems. And then you find where it becomes more repeatable and automatable and shareable across the ecosystem, which is precisely what they've done. The other side is there's some people that don't have the mindset, have the fear, have those challenges. And so much of what we do within the ECMA is going and engaging with the actual force, and simply having conversations with them, unpacking problems with them, and then just simply like planting seeds of ideas of like, well, what would be possible? What do you think if we did something like this? And then you start to see them start to realize what opportunities exist. And then when they see some of the most tactical and critical solutions supporting someone like 18th actually delivering capability, it creates space for them to think, well, I might be able to follow suit in that, right? And that's where we start to see the community grow.
Yeah, and I think you think about AWS and our mission to remove undifferentiated heavy lifting from organizations. You extended that concept to the folks like the 18th, right, to give them that space to innovate. So can you talk a little about some of the guardrails and capabilities that you put in place so that these guys could just focus on fixing the tools that they need for their mission and not worry about a lot of the other kind of things we talked about earlier on your ECMA slide?
Yeah. So I'll go back actually to my first conversation with the Secretary of the Army when I pitched this new strategy. As I said, listen, everyone that's going to be adopting this technology, everyone's going to have to do some common things first, deliver some common tools first, just to be able to start focusing on building to solve the problem that they have. So how about we just give them those common services as a service? There's common cloud services to meet regulation within the Department of Defense around the secure cloud computing architecture. How about we just do that for them as a service so they don't have to worry about how they're going to configure DNS or like NTP on the back end. You just consume it. There's also some common services for data, right? How do I start to unlock and understand my data within my system? There's some common services when it comes to software development, right? Some basic tooling to like move people on a journey towards automation in CI/CD, but they have to start somewhere. And some of the big wins we have are just simply access to a centralized code repository as a service, right? But by providing these as a service on day one, they can focus on the delta, which is their mission. What are they going to do with those tools to actually solve their problems for the mission that they have? And literally, 18th, 101st, and 82nd, we're doing undifferentiating, literal heavy lifting, right? And when you start to actually give them access to different and better resources, you allow them to apply that time and that grunt to something that actually has value for the mission, rather than high toil, low value things you just have to do to then focus on the mission that's the critical part.
Yeah, Brian, it's funny, like I remember my dad served in the Army, and something he'd always say is like, if it wasn't issued to me, I didn't need it.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you think about the journey of a green suiter to do this innovation, it's important that they get these tools, for better or worse, issued to them so they can actually focus on doing their job. And the tools they were issued was Microsoft Office on a 5-year-old PC, right?
Yeah.
So how have some of these innovations saved time? Like we talked about undifferentiated heavy lifting. What are some of the things that you were able to free up your warrants to go do instead of messing around with ATOs and security scans and all this other stuff?
Yeah, there's a couple just great examples of this, right? And to go to, and we'll get there in a second, but to go to kind of Paul's comment, I think you mentioned too, is there's a real collaboration effort across not only 18th Airborne Corps, but other corps and other organizations. So as we were building, as we were creating, as we were experimenting and learning in our space, we were sharing. So that the challenges that we went through, First Corps didn't have to go through, or Third Corps, or a different organization, right? And vice versa. So there's a great collaboration and innovation. Yes, the best innovation comes from bottom up, right? But then there's also a lateral kind of movement that is required for really scalability of innovation. And we really found that. And then once we kind of started peeling back the true capabilities of cloud, right? And when we look at cloud and 18th Airborne Corps, again, as a data-centric warfighting corps, right? Cloud is a means to compute, store, transport, and secure data, right? And if data is the new ammunition, cloud is a way to weaponize that ammunition to make our warfighters more lethal on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think you think about how cloud does those things today: store, transport, compute, data, process. But really, what we're trying to do for the warfighter is generate a decision advantage, right?
Yes.
And be able to come up with a plan of action or course of action that is better than the other guys, so that we prevail.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important to understand how all these great things that we're looking at in cloud for our enterprises and other stuff, these guys are applying it towards that end, right? Protecting soldiers, bringing them home safe, reducing the amount of things that they have to do out in the field that we don't want them to have to go through.
Yeah.
So, and that community of practice comment is really interesting because you started building that inside of the 18th with all the different divisions there. But Paul, you've taken that to a different scale, not only Army-wide, but you've actually been trying to take the learnings and hard lessons and bumps on the noggin you've gotten elsewhere in the department to help other people learn.
Well, for instance, part of the community that they built over at 18th, right, grew across the divisions, no doubt, but across the other corps. But we were learning as well. We were part of that community as well, right? We're getting feedback on how we're providing services, how our processes are either helping or hurting them. Like our goal when we stood up the ECMA was to deliver services that people love, right? But that's hard to do. There's a journey to go on when you actually get to that place, and there's some bumps and bruises along the way. So we were learning along with them, but we're also in a role on behalf of the United States Army that looks a lot like some other roles of other organizations across the Department of Defense. And they're going through similar challenges as well. And so, for instance, even before the ECMO was stood up, part of our strategy for how we're going to deliver some of the services were lessons learned from over in the intelligence community, or lessons learned from the United States Air Force and some of the things that they've done, or the United States Navy and some of the things that they've done, what worked and what didn't work, that enabled us to really stand on their shoulders and establish what we have within the ECMA. But as we learn with tactical operational capabilities when it comes to 18th, we're learning some things when it comes to our global architecture that we're able to share back with our sister services so we can grow. So you start to see these different communities of practice emerge, right? You start to see people that have kind of a shared mission start to band together. We have communities of practice when it comes to other customers in the cloud that all share the uniqueness of we're all customers going through this journey of modernization in the cloud. Then you have a community when it comes to the people providing the services and the architectures and the ecosystems themselves that are learning how to deliver better services as a service so people can focus on the delta. And when you start to see these communities start to grow and kind of learn together, what I think is really helpful to some of like the outcomes that have been enabled and the differentiating things that 18th has been able to do is in the old world, when you had to bring everything to the field before you can just get running, to have visibility, to then be able to say, where do we go and what do we do? When you start to have that more persistent data as an asset in the cloud, you focus on enhancing connectivity and availability of that connectivity. Now the moment you get to the field, you're not waiting for a whole bunch of servers to be stood up. You actually have visibility because you have a persistent actual COP, right? You can actually see the common operating picture of where you're at. And you immediately have what we call maneuver, right? You're immediately able to start to take action. You're able to start to make faster decisions on the battlefield so that you can have better survivability. And so when you think about what you start to unlock and enable, I would argue that those stories are the ones that open people's eyes, and then they say, how did you get there? And then you start to see those communities grow to go on that journey.
And I think we've got a couple stories, and to the community of practice comment, it wasn't just the war fighters in that community. We weren't isolated into ourselves. We partnered with AWS. We partnered with LSIs. We sought kind of the best, and we had tremendous help to get where we were going because we were fairly new in this journey, right? The Army and DoD writ large when it came to really leveraging cloud computing store for tactical. So we partnered and we brought in some of the best and brightest to really help us get to where we knew we needed to be, right? And really that came to bear quick with 18th Airborne Corps. And I know earlier when I talked about, who is 18th Airborne Corps and why does it matter to everyone in this room? We look at what happened in Afghanistan with the closure of that airfield, right? We had to rapidly deploy our warfighters from 18th Airborne Corps over to Afghanistan and secure that airfield for the withdrawal. And then really one of the challenging things that what we had through all that is simply tracking our personnel and equipment from home station in the theater in that rapid sequence at that scale, right? So I relive those days in my mind right now and how we were getting ready to kind of just go from a butcher block with tick marks to an Excel spreadsheet to a PowerPoint. And then eventually, really in about a week to a week and a half, we got it to a data analytics platform hosted in the cloud that was able to provide more real-time visibility of our troops, right? Jock Pageant, who is the chief data officer for 18th Airborne Corps, said, in order to get to the fight, in order to be in a fight, you have to get to the fight, right? It's important for us to get there. So through that exercise, we had to start looking at how we leverage data from all the Air Force systems and all the different systems to bring it in. And then we learned some hard lessons there, but we didn't stop. We didn't box it up and put it on the shelf, right? We continue to iterate. We continue to experiment in the cloud. We continue to run our mission command applications, right? And we even pushed it to a hybrid cloud environment where we're looking at disconnected operations. And then wouldn't you know it, probably a little less than a year ago, there was an event in Europe, right? And we were a little bit better prepared for that. And then we were able to leverage some of our earlier lessons learned from experimentation, from our lessons learned from HKIA, to where we can have better visibility of our soldiers moving to Europe and then provide support for them over there. So it's really a learning organization, and we're continuing to grow. It's a journey, and we're excited about where we are, but that's really how we took cloud and then through a process continued. If we stuck to the modern kind of acquisition cycle or fielding cycle, we'd have given them requirements and then waited for the Army to field it. And in 18th Airborne Corps, we just simply don't have the opportunity to wait. We've got to go.
And that's an education thing, I think, that we've got to really start focusing on you now are all included in this community of practice that we're talking about, by the way, right? Most of you are here because you have an interest in what we're doing or you participate in it. So when you think about this community of practice and talking about requirements, you think about the legacy way that we buy and procure things, right? For very good reasons. There's never a rule that exists because it was just somebody's idea. Something happened and we put that rule in place to stop it. But when you think about modern agile development, you think about iterative processes to improve things, that doesn't really work.
No.
You know, it takes too long, it takes too much. By the time these guys give what they actually need and someone distills it down to a requirements docket that can be led as procurement, they've already moved on. They're figuring out something else. These guys, that's what they do when they're out in the field, so they're going to do it at home. How do you, Paul, see the need for this transformation, and how should we start to affect it, especially us kind of at the individual contributor, we're here doing, enabling the mission. How can we start to impact that process or augment it in ways that help us give folks like Brian the tools they need?
Well, I think the constraints has changed when it comes to the availability of cloud computing, because if you look at the constraints that used to exist when you talk about delivering any capability for the United States Army, you know, I'm not talking about guns or ammo, like we just talked about software, you would still have to predict, you know, what am I deploying, how much data, therefore what resources do I need, how many cores of compute do I need, because you want to get the best value when it came to buying physical hardware, and you want to make big bulk purchases. And so that kind of forced people to try and predict the future, do these big bulk purchases, and I've got to wait 6 months for all this hardware to be shipped out to me. And there were constraints in the environment because you couldn't just get a little bit of compute to try something immediately and be like, that's a really bad idea. And so we created these processes that naturally complemented where we were, you know, 25 years ago. But with cloud computing as an online, on-demand resource, now we don't have to predict the future. Now we can try something quick and be like, that was horrendous. Try something different and not have to pay for persistent bad decisions. Yep. And some of our processes, many of our processes, haven't changed with the times. And so now we find people that say, we've got access to cloud, but we still have these very hard fixed requirements that says we can't actually leverage the resource that's sitting right next to us. There's some other places where we've got cloud computing today, but I would say we're barely touching the opportunity with it because of how some requirement was written. And so when you look at what 18th had done, we're having discussions in the Pentagon of like, what value are we getting out of 18th? What is this really impacting? Because it's not just Dragon Cloud, there's more to it. Right. And I drew this picture and I said, you're actually creating immediate feedback loops from your customer that's validating what's working and what's not working. And because of the constraints of how we are, you know, writing requirements and organized in this very waterfall model, the people that happen to be the ones responding to their problems are also 18th. Mm-hmm. But this can't be the thing that's the only way that we do business. Yep. And so what that changed in the Army is it starts to change how we actually write requirements for mission command. And so we were able to get each one of the Army capability managers who write requirements for the Army all together in a room that says, where are we constraining ourselves and where do we need to be more objective in our requirements? What are these kind of ideas and objectives that we want to achieve, not explicit resources to get us there? What's the end and not the means? Because we write a lot of requirements in the means. And we start to see opportunity be unlocked. And now our acquisition ecosystem within our program execution offices, the people that actually receive requirements and go and build and deliver a capability, now we see them actually incentivized to focus with downstream customers rather than focusing upstream to meeting a fixed requirement that may not be the right thing. Yep. And so now we are actually having a tighter feedback loop where the PEOs are working directly with customers in Forces Command like 18th Airborne Corps, and we start to see their like ideas, you know, light up where they can start to experiment and deliver better value and validate that with a customer. And we see this only leaning into some of the executive orders that you see coming out of the White House when it comes to the actual user experience of things. Mm-hmm. A lot of times the solutions that we field don't have a great user experience because it's not actually the thing that solves the problem. Yep. And so we're tightening those feedback loops, and it's actually started to change the way we write requirements. It started to change our organizational practices, and it's definitely started to change the mindsets and the skill sets of the people that need to be involved in order for this to scale across the Army. And now we're taking that essentially across to the other program execution offices and to the other customers for the other capabilities that we have across the other verticals of the United States Army, not just the warfighting within Forces Command.
You know, and I think at Amazon we have this saying, right? We always are looking at things as a one-way door or a two-way door, meaning that if I go down this certain course of action, do I have a way to come back and try it again and go a different path, right? And so internally at Amazon, every one of us in the technical organization has access to a cloud account. I can go spin up whatever I want, play around with it, do experimentation. And one of the most important things of that is that I can fail repeatedly and have no penalty because I have such rapid access to things. I can spin it up, knock it down, start over, try again. But in the department, Brian,
Yeah.
with the lead times and the amount of effort that it takes, you can't afford to fail. And outside of your mission, obviously, which you cannot fail at that mission, but in innovation, you can't really afford to have that failure. Your soldiers can't have the psychological safety to know that it's okay to experiment. It's okay to try an idea that's not going to work out, because it takes so long to get things. So when you have this access to elastic resources in AWS, like, can you talk a little bit about some of the experimentation your soldiers feel like they can now go do? Plus, you think about the guardrails that ECMA gives you, it really opens up an aperture for them to try new things.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a pretty good story on guardrails. I don't know if you remember being in Jared's office, and then we were talking about trying to connect everything, and ECMA just, it wouldn't let us do it because of guardrails that were put in place to protect the environment and what we had going on. So really, you know, the cloud, Dragon Cloud, what 101st was able to do, and then share with 3rd Infantry Division and other divisions across, gave them the opportunity that you call it a playground, you can call it a landing zone, you can call it a landing pad, however you want to call it. But it was a space that can build, blow it up, start again, right? And then continue to train, right? Because training is important for what we do in the Army. But having that environment in that dev environment that had the policies in place. I think the first Sea Army environment I had like 216 policies in place or something like that. But it was there, right? But if we wanted to change something, right, we had access to the change control board in a pretty rapid fashion, right? There was great communication and feedback. So yes, there was a place for us to experiment and to innovate, right? And then to really kind of push ideas and concepts, but there was guardrails set up, policies in place to ensure that we protected the systems, the data, and then everything outside of it.
Yeah, one of the worst situations you can have is when people are trying to experiment and learn, and all of a sudden, very sensitive information is now in a place where it should not be. And so there's certain guardrails that, for instance, like we put in place. The example that Brian's talking about is they were actually trying to respond to a need in the field and deliver a new application in service. And they're like, well, what about we connect these different things? And I was like, not that way. But we have a way that we can get it done. And there's some tweaks in the architecture because when it comes to how we deliver a service and capability, we want to get to a place where we can be more and more and more passive rather than active in how people are doing work. Think, for instance, there's some other instances in the Department of Defense that are delivering cloud as a service, but you actually have to put in a ticket for somebody else to spin up the resource for you to then go consume as a customer. One of the requirements for cloud computing is self-service on-demand capability. That's not self-service or on-demand capability. You're taking a self-service on-demand capability and just completely, crippling it when you hand it to a customer. Our customers don't experience that, but we got to work within the bounds of the architecture. And I tell this to my team all the time, like, friends, we have the pen. Part of as we learn along the way where we're putting needless, constraints in place that don't actually add value and they're not actually making us more secure, it just kind of feels more secure, we have the pen to change those policies and deliver services that customers actually love. So we're in the trenches with our customers, learning with them, because it's not like we set this thing up 5 years ago and God, I hope it's great for the future. But we have to learn with them, we have to change along the way because we have to remove the barriers to entry, the appropriate barriers to entry that just need to be out of the way. Some other barriers to entry make sense, but we've got to create more and more space for them to play. So for instance, part of them leaning in created this construct within our team of, we call it like dev first or dev only, but like you don't really know where you're trying to go, but you need access to resources. Cool, here's access to resources, run amok, and then as you figure it out and we figure it out together, we can create a pathway for you to get into production. And so it's all about us learning with them, right? Creating just enough space for them to run amok appropriately, run up like scissors, with erasers on the end, right?
Yeah.
But like just enough space for them to go, because we don't want that sensitive information in a place where it shouldn't be.
No.
But we also don't want that fear to stop us from innovating and delivering the services people need.
Yeah, and I think the guardrails, combined with the cloud services that we're building to secure those, to create certainty, infrastructure as code projects that, are being streamed into these landing zones, giving them that sandbox capability. One thing that I was thinking about, Brian, that I'm sure the audience would love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on is the other thing about this digital transformation of the Army is you think about the next generation of soldiers who are joining the Army to serve their country. and they're the TikTok generation. They're on their phones, everything's on here. You know, I see awesome, funny TikTok. My kid likes it. I see funny TikToks from soldiers all the time working in their spaces. And so you think about that, and you think about these kids all grew up in the iPhone world, right? My son's entire life was documented on an iPhone from the day he was born. So talk a little bit about how this is also helping to entice that next generation of soldiers to come in and do their service with the Army.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've learned inside 18th Airborne Corps is the soldiers coming in, they're coming in with skills. Like, they're coming in with passion and drive, but you know, they're here to be a paratrooper. There's a lot of pride in wearing that maroon beret, right? But they also want to contribute. So what we do inside 18th Airborne Corps is we actually have an opportunity for soldiers who have a certain aptitude for software development and coding to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I'd like to do this. And then the Corps supports it, right? So we not only give them, right, that cloud space or that platform and the guardrails that come in with it, but really it's about talent identification and talent utilization. And 18th Airborne Corps really embodies and understands that culture is critical to any kind of digital transformation, right? So when you join the Army or any service, you get assigned what's called a military occupational specialty, an MOS, right? And that's your job. To the conversation Paul and I were just having about the architecture that was on the board, right? That was for an application that we had to create rapidly. We didn't have time to really dev test prod over a long sprints, right? We had a real world event that occurred, and we had to find a means to collect data. And it was critical to the success, right? So that architecture and really the ultimate application that went from a drawing on a whiteboard in an office to an IATT in 2 weeks in a cloud environment was done by a transportation lieutenant and a medical services repairer, right? Awesome. It wasn't an IT specialist. You know, we're seeing that talent inside our formations just kind of starts to bubble up, right? Once we give them this space to experiment and really kind of their home, like that TikTok generation, like that's how they talk. Yeah. You know, I've got a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I swear they're gonna have neck problems because they're always like this, right? So like, we've got to give them that space, and that's who's joining the Army. And then, you know, what I love about 18th Airborne Corps, and you know, I'm not in the Corps anymore, but it's just an amazing place. It's about the culture, it's about the people, and there's just immense pride in what we do, because what we do has a significant impact on the nation.
Well, we've got young soldiers that are joining the Army that are digital natives.
Yep.
They're expecting information to be right there at their fingertips. They're expecting connectivity at all times. And we talk about recruiting and retention, and that's, in my opinion, one of the most important things that we're enabling when it comes to what we've delivered with cloud computing is not only are we training people in these capabilities, they're actually getting access to those resources as well. I think some of the challenges you see, you know, people that are across the Department of Defense, you know, when we talk about like some people leaving the service, is, you know, maybe their mother or their father also served before them, and they come to find that the stories that they heard growing up, and they come in and they're fielded the same resources that their parents were, you know, fielded. Yeah. And they're like, what is this? I can't do my job.
I don't mind inheriting my dad's whoopee, but I don't want his laptop.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you've got to adapt with the times and deliver services that people actually enjoy using. And you have to, if you want someone to come in and be like, I'm going to be delivering cloud computing architectures, you can't just train them and then give them access to Excel spreadsheets and think that you're like, you've got to give them access to the tools that you train them on. And what we've done is we've actually accelerated the actual ability to get the hands into the soldiers. We've got a relationship when it comes to training and doctrine command that actually has the schoolhouses for people, for them to get actual access into the environment and the service that they need. Same when we start to see people grow and standing up, for instance, we're getting a regional cyber center for cloud, is giving them access into the environment for hands-on. Yep. It's not just a tabletop exercise that some might do. We're doing this for real, and that's all about putting resources in the hands of people. And in my opinion, from a recruiting and retention perspective, now when you talk about not only are we going to train you, but we're actually going to resource you, enable you, and we're going to grow you in a career that actually complements, you know, maybe someone wants to be a soldier on the ground, but they also want to deliver software that makes their lives better and safer. We don't want to change them to like just a technology MOS. stay what you're doing, but have technology be something that all of our soldiers can leverage and tap into and demonstrate skill sets on to support all the different military occupational specialties that they've got across the entire Army.
Yeah, you brought up something that made me think, right? And all of us here who are in an industry supporting the DoD have all of us have cyber stories of working with cyber organizations. And so you mentioned an RCC for cloud, a regional cyber center for cloud, which is the Army's regional areas that they do focus on cybersecurity. Can you talk a little bit about the partnership? And I'll have Paul maybe, and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
The partnership you have with organizations like Army Cyber and others, that it's not just guardrails to keep you from doing dumb things and accidentally spinning up a 24x large when you only meant to spin up a 4x large, but it's also the tracking of data, things moving through the environment. Completely unbeknownst to me, something could have happened, and that happens. It's an imperfect world, right? So how have you partnered with those cyber organizations to include them in not just get them on board with your guardrails, but include them in the feedback loop so that they also evolve and they can learn from what you guys are learning?
As things become more and more connected, right, we need to have more and more context of things and how it all works together. Historically, in the United States Army, we've got a construct where someone's the enterprise and someone's in tactical. The two worlds rarely connect and talk, and if they do, they're these weird little special places, but one's very separate from the other. It was actually a pain point of the enterprise cloud management office when I first stood up, is I was like, when I look at enterprise, I'm thinking global. It's not just business systems and enterprise systems, it's also tactical systems as well. I had some very challenging discussions at the very beginning where it was like, oh, that's a tactical service. It'll never be in the cloud. And like that mindset had to change, but you had to demonstrate it. But as these things start to connect and we start to talk about security incidents, now you need to have visibility across the entire ecosystem. You can't regionally isolate and lock different things, like everything's starting to be connected. And so the partnership when we see with Army Cyber Command is actually how do we start to get visibility into those different things, get context as to what might be happening, and then be able to take action. Too often we are simply monitoring how bad we look and then telling something about it for somebody else to do something about it. We need to get to a place where we're monitoring and then remediating the issue immediately. And that's all about empowering people. And so partnering with our cyber and the 153rd Cyber Protection Team, getting them into the ecosystem, learning the technology, learning the customers that we have, the data workflows that exist, what operational outcomes are being impacted by different services, now allows them to take more action to remediate security issues as they arise so that we can maintain operational capability.
Yeah, kind of the approach we took early on in 18th Airborne Corps is, I think you talked about it from your dad, is you're issued equipment and you just use the equipment you're issued. Well, we looked at it as we were issued cloud environment, right? ECMA at the time came with 31 and 32 shared services, right? And that's what's provided to us. And C5ISR is one of those, right? So we knew that if we leveraged C Army, there was that the services that came along with it that provided that security. So as we would build and as we would experiment, we would have our cyber kind of ping us and see what we're doing, see how we're doing, but we'd always include ECMA. And same thing with the program offices who are responsible for fielding these mission command applications that are so critical to what we do. We wanted everyone to have visibility into what we were doing, because when we talk about fielding capability, it's all derived off of a requirement. Well, several times on some of these calls, they would ask for a requirements document, and I would just simply ask them to pick up a pen, because we're just going to talk about it right now, right? It happens at speed with the warfighter, right? So it's critical for the warfighter, if their job is just to consume and to use the equipment that's fielded to them, that those organizations like ECMA, like our cyber, like PM Mission Command, have that access and that feedback loop that we talked several times to make sure that the best solutions are delivered to the warfighter.
I learned this saying not long ago, so forgive me, I really love it. It's move things left of boom instead of right of boom, right? So I want to get to it before it blows up, not after. And so when you think about cyber security and security in general, whether you're in the commercial industry or in the DoD, it's always been kind of this like, all right, we have requirements, we're going to go build this thing, and then, okay, security guy, make it secure, versus building out with them in the room beginning, starting that whole development cycle you talked about, where the security guy is sitting right next to you, he is the one helping you assess the threat model, he's the one that's saying, these are the tools or the information I need to do my job to keep you safe, to enable your soldiers to go use these tools and move forward. Paul, I guess kind of closing thought, how would you maybe just quickly summarize your overall thinking of how the government needs to continue that iterative cycle, the back half of the operations? I've launched it, it's in production. How do I go back around and start over again to make it better and do the next version?
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit before of kind of the waterfall way that we're organized, moving into more iterative delivery and development, that true agile practice, right? And it's starting to actually build the skill sets and understanding what agile means is that you're really never done, right? You're constantly adding capabilities or services. You're constantly, hearing new feedbacks and making tweaks. But when it comes to even like security relevant, incidents that come, you've got bugs. Well, if you're going to make a change to be able to address a security issue, right, you need the ability to make the change in real time. No different than if someone gave you a piece of feedback for a new service or capability, you should be able to make that change as well. And so it's all about building these muscles for truly just software's never done. We're constantly in this business of delivering a product and service that needs to grow with our customer and grows with the market that we want to capture. And it's changing those behaviors. And we would talk about stuff like security. Sometimes with security, something's like bolted on at the very end just to get it into production. But what's going to happen next week when there's a patch that needs to arise? And all of a sudden, this very fragile, very custom thing that like don't touch it, otherwise it'll break. Now you're finding you have to touch it to change it. And in typical practices, you've got these plans of actions and milestones to address an issue. And oftentimes we monitor how bad we look, but we can't do anything about it. And so part of the ecosystem that we created, but more so kind of the contract that we've established with customers from day one is, here are the hooks that we have into the ecosystem. Here are the guardrails that we've put in place. And it's the actual practice of shifting security left, which is at the moment of first like ideation and development of something, you've got an ecosystem that you're playing within that allows you to run appropriately with scissors, but keeps you safe. And so that when it comes to actually getting into production, it's not like a bolt-on security discussion. We've had visibility on the entire journey, and we'll continue to have visibility on your journey in production, day 2, and beyond in operations. And there's so much power and value for now security teams trying to manage risk to be able to have visibility. Because in the old world, oftentimes the bolt-on security thing or the way you'd get into production is you'd throw a firewall in front of it, no one can see it, no one can touch it, and you just kind of live in your own little bubble. And from a security perspective, if there's an issue, it's kind of hard to address it if you can't see it. So there's so much power that we give to people by providing an ecosystem that actually allows us to maintain, appropriate risk, because we understand the opportunity of mission. We also understand the risks that we're taking, the probability and impact of that risk, and we're able to move forward together.
It's risk management framework, not risk avoidance framework,
100%.
right? And so we have to understand the risks in the beginning to understand what we need to do to mitigate them. And then, admiring the problem of, yes, our environment hasn't been patched in 3 months. Like, well, no, let's not admire it. Why is it getting patched daily? Why are we not doing iterative testing to make sure that patches don't break stuff and so they can roll immediately? It's definitely something we're moving towards in the department. I've seen it in the Army and as well as other places. But we've got some ways to go with culture. So as we start to wrap up, one thing I'll point out on the slide is both of these gentlemen are former. They've very recently left these roles, and they're here today because they want you all to understand the learnings they've been going through the last couple of years with this journey. But I guess, Brian, I'll start with you, and Paul, I'll pose the same question. Given that you've recently left the government, A, would you want to go back at some point after you've gotten some experience or something like that? And then B, what would your first thing you'd want to do to continue this journey be once you got back into the government?
Yeah, so I hope you guys can pick it up from this session, but I'm extremely passionate about the warfighter. Right? I spent 20 years in uniform. I've served with them. I've served in guard towers in Baghdad in the initial invasion, oversaw OPs in Afghanistan. And what America's best sons and daughters do for our country's security is just absolutely incredible. So I'm passionate about the warfighter, passionate about giving them the best capability to do their jobs so that they can come home safe, right? So I will always seek opportunity to have the biggest impact on the warfighter. At the time, and we can talk about talent management, at the time in my career, the next stage would not have been in this space, right? So I left the government to continue in this cloud, DevSecOps, cybersecurity space outside. And my moral compass and my North Compass will always be pointed towards the warfighter. Yeah. So I will always seek opportunity to better serve the warfighter in this space. And if an opportunity was to arise for me to enter the government again, right, the thing I would seek and really try to push forward is we did something really cool in 18th Airborne Corps. We did something innovative, right? We had a problem, it sucked, we found a solution, and then we iterated on it, and then we saw value, ROI, over and over again, right? So now it's how do we build the platforms and the systems to make that repeatable and scalable at enterprise, and then to ensure that our joint services and our mission partners, we all have visibility of data, access to data, and ensure that our warfighters are taken care of, right? So that's what, if I was to come back in, my focus and emphasis would be to carry the torch, to continue to establish platforms that soldiers can leverage to do their jobs better and come home safe.
Awesome. Paul, same question to you.
Well, so this last round was actually my second round in government. I was in the intelligence community for 6 years, then left to go out to commercial industry, and then came back in for this role, and I'll be going back out to commercial industry, and absolutely I would come back into the government. But I see so much value in trying to merge and bring these cultures together. There's a number of articles or different people that will talk about just kind of like the culture of the DoD, the intelligence community, and like not well understood, not people that understand to engage, or even the same thing when it comes to Silicon Valley. And the more and more that we can actually exchange people and actually have them go and live experiences in these other cultures, we're able to bring the goodness back in too. So for instance, when I first left government and went out to industry, I was able to translate and communicate for people what's happening behind the walls of the Pentagon and kind of drop those, like I said before, perception being reality is sometimes it's just simply something you just don't know, or like you don't have the actual skill sets to actually understand it, to be able to see what's true. And I was able to start to kind of unpack some of the myths, if you will, and kind of bring those two worlds together. But that came from me leaving kind of my comfort space of the government and going and working in industry. No different than when I came back into government. People were like, oh, you're gonna bring industry experience with you. And so I think there's so much beauty in these two things merging and kind of growing. I think there's immense value when it comes to even soldiers that do, for instance, skills bridge out into to industry. We've got people that will, as part of their promotion and growing in their career, will go spend some time out in industry, and it's just so valuable for there to be intermingling of those communities and those cultures, because I think that there's a lot of misconceptions between the two, and we can simply be the means and the mechanisms to be able to break down those misconceptions, build up better relationships, and then accelerate the adoption of modern technology into the government. And that's what I see, just me leaving and coming back, other people leaving and coming back. Like, we're all playing a role to try and bring these worlds together because we've got a mission to accomplish and we can't do it alone.
I can tell you one of the biggest things that's made our defense team stronger at Amazon is the SkillBridge folks that come and work with us. The people who are prior service, those innovators and those folks, they've done their duty, they've decided to move to industry, and they bring that knowledge and culture to us, and we integrate it with ours, and it's just so much more powerful as we partner with the government. So this is awesome. So everybody, that's the end of our time. I don't want you to leave yet. I have a really cool video I want to show you of what these guys are actually doing. And I would ask that as you watch this, just think about what we've talked about today. Think about the stuff that we're doing to enable cloud in the department. And remember, these are the people that we're doing it for. With that, we're going to go ahead and start the video, and then you're free to go get ready for the party. But I want to thank you all for joining us today and joining us here at reInvent in 2022. And we'll see you all back here next year.
There we go.
This thing's epic, by the way, too.
Epic. Where's Matt? There he is. Oh, I forgot that. Yeah, it's good.
All right.
Good job, Matt.
So thanks again for coming. You please do me a giant favor and fill out the survey in the app. Let us know how we can bring content like this and bring more great folks like Brian and Paul to you next year. Thank you.